Ethan stepped off the shuttle and felt the strange, sweet air of Seraphis brush against his skin. The sky was a swirl of violet and gold clouds reflecting off towers that reached higher than any city he had ever seen. Floating walkways shimmered as Seraphians moved gracefully above, their long limbs and delicate forms almost glowing in the strange light. Every instinct in him screamed that this world was alive and yet cold in its own way. He was here as a human ambassador, sent to negotiate peace with the Seraphian Empire. Politics, treaties, and diplomacy were his usual tools, but he felt unease in his chest that had nothing to do with negotiations. Something in him sensed a quiet loneliness in this city of giants and rulers. As he entered the grand hall, his eyes immediately caught her. She was small, even by human standards, standing alone in a corner. Her pale blue skin shimmered softly, and her eyes, larger than human eyes, glowing faintly like stars, were filled with something Ethan recognized instantly: sadness, fear, a longing to be seen. The room was full of nobles, generals and diplomats, their voices echoing with importance. They ignored her. Some even laughed quietly at her size, dismissing her presence. The small alien princess, Lyra, the daughter of the emperor, was invisible to them. Her thin hands gripped a delicate staff, and she kept her head down, as if shrinking might make her disappear completely. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. While others turned away, he felt drawn to her, not out of duty or curiosity, but out of instinct. Her quiet vulnerability tugged at something deep inside him. He had seen loneliness in humans before, but this was different. She was surrounded by power and wealth, yet she was utterly alone. The introductions began. Words about treaties and resources filled the air. Nobles boasting about their accomplishments, generals showing off knowledge of distant planets. Lyra's soft voice barely reached anyone when she asked a question. A minister rolled his eyes and whispered something cruel. The girl flinched, clutching her staff tighter, shrinking further into the corner. Ethan felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had trained to stay composed, to follow protocol, to avoid emotional entanglements, but he couldn't look away. In that moment, he decided that no rules mattered more than kindness. He took a step forward, ignoring the bustling crowd and the frowning diplomats. When he reached her, he knelt down carefully, keeping his voice soft and calm. "Hello," he said. "I'm Ethan. You don't have to be invisible here." Lyra's large eyes widened. No one had ever said that to her, not truly. Her lips trembled as she lifted her hand. Ethan reached for it gently, feeling the tiny warmth of her fingers against his. They were delicate, fragile, yet somehow strong under his touch. He could feel her heart beating fast, nervous but curious, a silent hope flickering in her gaze. For the first time that day, Lyra smiled, a small, hesitant curve of her lips. It wasn't just a smile. It was the first spark of trust she had shown in a long time. Ethan squeezed her hand lightly. "You're important," he whispered, "and you deserve to be seen." The hall continued around them, filled with voices and chatter, but in that moment, the noise faded. Ethan and Lyra were in a bubble of understanding, two souls from completely different worlds connecting in a quiet, simple gesture. No one else noticed, but that did not matter. He had seen her, and she had been waiting somehow for someone to do just that. A small tear formed in the corner of Lyra's eye, but she blinked it away. Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the vastness of the hall. Ethan smiled, a warmth spreading through him he hadn't expected. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just here to help you be seen." It was a tiny act, a simple human gesture, but it changed everything. For the first time, Lyra felt that maybe she could be more than just the small, ignored princess of Seraphis. And for the first time, Ethan realized that sometimes the greatest battles were not fought with armies or words. They were fought with a single, kind act of recognition. And so in that hall of towering spires and alien voices, a human reached for a small alien princess, and the world quietly shifted around them, though no one else knew it yet. After that first quiet moment in the grand hall, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Lyra. She was small, fragile, and yet there was something unshakably strong in her presence. He had seen it in the way she held herself despite being ignored, in the subtle way she observed everyone around her. She was a princess, yes, but more than that, she was a mind that deserved to be noticed. Days passed, and Ethan found ways to spend time with her outside the busy halls of the palace. They walked together in the glowing gardens where alien flowers swayed softly under violet skies. Lyra showed him her favorite corners, quiet places where the wind whispered through crystal-like leaves, where light danced over the pools that reflected the sky like liquid glass. She spoke softly, telling him about her life, her fears, and her dreams. "I love painting star maps," she said one evening, her small hands tracing invisible lines over the air. "I imagine places I've never seen, places where no one judges me for being too small or too quiet." Ethan smiled, fascinated. "And are these places beautiful?" "They are," she said, "because they are mine. But they feel empty without someone to share them with." Her words struck him. In her voice was the weight of loneliness, a longing for someone who could truly see her. Ethan realized that no one in the palace had ever listened like this. No one had ever looked at her and treated her as someone who mattered. And yet here she was, sharing her heart without fear. Their bond grew quickly. Ethan never acted like a diplomat trying to impress. He simply listened. He asked questions, noticed small details, and encouraged her thoughts. He treated her as an equal, not a princess to be fawned over or a child to be dismissed. And slowly Lyra began to respond, opening up in ways she had never done before. Sometimes, they would sit for hours in the quiet gardens, watching alien birds with glowing wings flutter among floating vines. Lyra would talk about the music she loved, the stories she read, the stars she mapped at night. Ethan listened, fascinated by her curiosity, her intelligence, her gentle sense of humor. Yet not all was peaceful. Whispers followed them wherever they went. Some nobles frowned, thinking it inappropriate for a human to be so close to the princess. Rumors began to circulate in quiet tones. Some said Ethan wanted power. Some said he would manipulate Lyra for human gain. The pressure made Lyra hesitant. She feared for him, for herself, and for what others might think. One evening, under the soft glow of 2 moons, Lyra finally admitted her fear. "I want to be seen, but I'm afraid they will punish you for noticing me. They will not understand why I trust a human." Ethan held her tiny hands in his. "I'm not afraid," he said firmly. "I came here to see you, Lyra. Not to change you, not to control you, but to make sure someone notices your voice. No one should make you invisible." Her eyes filled with tears, shimmering like liquid stars. For the first time, she felt truly understood. She realized that trust wasn't about power or titles. It was about someone who cared enough to reach for her hand. And Ethan had done that without hesitation, without doubt. That night, as the wind carried the alien scents of Seraphis through the gardens, Lyra felt something new stirring inside her. Hope. Perhaps she could be more than just the small princess no one noticed. Perhaps she could be seen, appreciated, and even loved. Ethan, sitting beside her on a floating crystal bench, realized something too. Humanity's strength wasn't just in technology, diplomacy, or war. It was in empathy, in courage, in simple, quiet acts of kindness. And right now, as he held her hand beneath the glowing moons, he knew he was part of something far greater than any treaty. He was part of making someone feel seen when the universe had ignored her for far too long. And so, a quiet connection grew, one made of trust, understanding, and gentle human courage. The small alien princess had found a friend, a protector, and perhaps the first spark of something more. The world outside could ignore her still, but here, in these moments with Ethan, she was seen. Truly seen, for the first time in her life. As Lyra and Ethan grew closer, the palace began to whisper. Nobles and ministers who had once ignored the small princess now watched her every move. They whispered among themselves, their voices sharp with suspicion. A human touching the princess? A human sharing secrets with her? Some called it scandalous, others dangerous. Lyra noticed the change. Eyes followed her in hallways, whispers trailed her in gardens. Even her closest attendants began to look uneasy. The fear she had always carried, hidden beneath her quiet composure, began to rise again. She had felt safe with Ethan, but the palace was a world that never forgave mistakes. One afternoon, while they walked under the floating crystal arches of the palace gardens, Lyra stopped abruptly. "Ethan, they're watching us," she whispered. Her small hand gripped his tightly, seeking reassurance. Ethan squeezed her fingers back. "Let them watch. I won't let anyone harm you. Not physically, not emotionally. But words alone couldn't protect them." That evening, the Emperor summoned Ethan to the throne room. The room was massive, every corner filled with Seraphian guards and officials. The Emperor's face was calm but unreadable, his glowing eyes fixed on the human. "Ethan," he said slowly, his voice echoing across the chamber, "it has come to my attention that you have grown unusually close to my daughter. A human may not touch the princess. It is forbidden." Ethan bowed respectfully, but he did not falter. "Your Highness, I do not seek to take anything from her. I only wish to ensure she is seen, heard, and respected. She has been invisible her whole life, and I cannot ignore her suffering." The court murmured. Some nobles scowled, their whispers growing louder. "How dare a human presume to care for the princess?" one minister hissed. "He will corrupt her, manipulate her, or worse." Lyra stood quietly behind her father, her small frame tense. She wanted to speak, to defend Ethan, but the weight of the room held her back. For the first time, fear clawed at her chest. She worried for him, for herself, for what might happen if the Emperor's anger could not be restrained. Ethan straightened, meeting the Emperor's gaze steadily. "Sir, I'm not here to manipulate or gain favor. I am here to show that even a human can care without selfish motives. I respect your daughter. I respect your throne. But respect must also include seeing her, not ignoring her presence." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, and for a tense moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Some admired Ethan's courage, but many feared it. Lyra's heart pounded. She had never seen a human so calm in the face of so much authority, yet so firm in his principles. Finally, the Emperor spoke again, his voice softer, almost reluctant. "I will consider your words, human. But know this. My daughter's safety and reputation come before all else. One wrong move and the consequences will be severe." Ethan bowed again, silently promising he would honor that warning. He had stepped into a world of rules he barely understood, yet his loyalty to Lyra outweighed fear. "I understand, Your Highness. I will not fail her." As he left the throne room, Lyra ran to him, clutching his hand. Her eyes glistened. "You could have been thrown out, or worse. Why do you keep risking yourself for me?" Ethan held her close, careful not to scare her, and whispered, "Because someone had to see you, because someone had to care, and that someone will always be me." For the first time, Lyra realized that courage was not only about bravery in battle or authority in a palace. It could also be quiet, steady, and human. And Ethan had it in abundance, but the palace's eyes were still on them and the whispers were far from over. Danger was closer than they realized, and soon, the strength of their bond would be tested, not by gentle words but by fire, fear, and the harsh reality of a world that refused to notice the small, alien princess. The palace had never felt more tense. Rumors about Ethan and Lyra had spread like wildfire, and whispers turned into warnings. Some nobles were plotting in secret, believing that if they could separate the human from the princess, they could regain control over her influence. One evening, while the twin moons rose over Seriphus, Lyra walked through the gardens alone. She was trying to find a quiet space, a moment away from the eyes and the judgment. But shadows moved between the glowing trees, subtle at first and then closer. Danger was near. Ethan had been nearby, aware that the palace corridors and gardens were no longer safe. He had promised to protect her, and now instinct kicked in. When he saw the first figures emerge from the shadows, clad in black armor with eyes full of malice, he ran toward her without hesitation. "Lyra," he shouted, grabbing her small hand. Her wide eyes met his, full of fear and surprise. "We have to go, now." The princess didn't hesitate. She trusted him completely, even as her heart raced. She stumbled, and he caught her immediately, steadying her in his arms as they dodged past the first wave of attackers. The gardens, which had once been serene and magical, were now a maze of danger. Floating petals and glowing pools reflected the chaos above, but Ethan's focus never wavered. Lyra's voice trembled. Why are you risking yourself for me?" Ethan glanced at her, his expression calm yet intense. "Because someone had to. Because no one else saw you, and I cannot let them harm you. You are not invisible to me." They ran through the garden paths, leaping over glowing streams and ducking beneath crystalline branches. Shadows followed relentlessly, but Ethan's quick thinking and human instincts gave them a slight advantage. Lyra clung to his arm, her small hand wrapped tightly around his, and for the first time she realized how strong his courage was, not just in fighting, but in caring. Finally, they reached a hidden exit, a narrow tunnel carved into the side of the palace that few knew existed. Ethan pushed her inside first, then followed, locking the entrance behind them. The muffled sounds of pursuit faded as they caught their breath in the cool, quiet darkness. Lyra pressed her small frame against him, trembling. Tears ran down her cheeks. I don't understand. Why do you keep coming for me? Why don't you just leave me alone? Ethan knelt before her, lifting her hands gently. Because you matter, Lyra. You've been ignored your whole life, dismissed by everyone around you. But I see you. I hear you. And I will not turn away, no matter the danger. She looked into his eyes and felt a warmth she had never known. For the first time, she believed that someone could truly care for her without expectation, without judgment, and without fear of consequences. She felt seen, understood, and protected. Ethan smiled softly. We'll get through this. Together. You are stronger than you think, but I will always be here to help you stand when the world tries to knock you down. Lyra's tears turned into a small, hesitant smile. She realized that courage could be shared, that fear could be faced with the support of someone who believed in her completely. She squeezed his hand tightly, letting him know she trusted him fully. In that quiet tunnel away from the chaos of the palace, something shifted. Their bond deepened, not just as protector and princess, but as two beings who had chosen to stand together against a world that refused to see the small, overlooked. Outside, the palace lights continued to glow, oblivious to the small human and alien who had survived the first threat. But inside the hidden tunnel, Lyra felt safe. She felt hope. And for the first time, she imagined a future where she would no longer be invisible, where she could walk with strength, and where someone's hand would always reach for hers. And Ethan knew, as he held her hand in the dark, that the fight was just beginning. But together, they could face anything. The palace had returned to its usual quiet grandeur after the rebellion in the gardens, but the tension lingered. Nobles whispered, eyes flicking toward the princess and the human ambassador whenever they passed. It was clear. Ethan's closeness with Lyra had not gone unnoticed, and not everyone approved. Lyra felt the weight of those whispers. Some courtiers stared openly, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and disapproval. She walked with her head held high, but inside a quiet fear remained. What if the Emperor decided to separate them? What if Ethan was taken from her? One morning, the summons came. The Emperor's voice echoed through the vast corridors of the palace, calling Ethan to the throne room. Ethan's heart did not falter. He had prepared himself. Whatever the court expected, he would face it for Lyra. The throne room was immense, the ceiling stretching higher than he could see, crystal lights casting reflections across polished floors. The Emperor sat upon his throne, his eyes glowing faintly, fixed on Ethan. Nobles and guards surrounded the edges of the room, their expressions sharp and wary. Ethan, the Emperor began, his voice calm but commanding, your continued closeness to my daughter has caused unrest. You have risked not only your own safety but hers. Speak now. Why should I allow this? Ethan bowed respectfully, keeping his gaze steady. Your Highness, I do not seek power or favor. I am not here to manipulate your daughter or challenge your throne. I am here to show that someone can care without selfish motives. She has been ignored her whole life, dismissed for her size and her quiet nature. I cannot allow her to remain invisible when I see her worth, the court murmured. Some nobles scowled, whispering their disapproval, but others exchanged surprised glances. Ethan's words were not loud or dramatic, yet they carried a truth that could not be ignored. Lyra stepped forward, small but determined. Her hand found Ethan's and she squeezed it for courage. Father, she said softly but clearly, he sees me. He listens. He does not dismiss me like others do. I trust him, and I choose to be with him. A hush fell over the room. The Emperor's glowing eyes softened, studying his daughter. He saw the strength in her voice, the quiet fire that had always been there but rarely recognized. And he saw Ethan, not as a foreign human but as someone who had proven courage, loyalty, and respect. You speak wisely, my daughter, the Emperor said at last, his voice firm yet approving. A bond built on respect and understanding cannot be dismissed lightly. I see now that your heart is not easily swayed by fear or whispers. If this human proves true to you, he may remain by your side. Lyra's chest swelled with relief. She glanced at Ethan, whose expression mirrored her hope. No one had ever spoken to her like this, or treated her as an equal. No one had ever offered trust so freely and courageously. The nobles shifted uneasily, realizing that the Emperor's favor had shifted. A human once seen as an outsider had earned the right to stand beside the princess. Some grumbled, but even they could not deny the strength in Ethan's integrity and the clarity in Lyra's choice. After the audience, Ethan and Lyra walked through the palace gardens, their hands entwined. The danger had not vanished, but something had changed. The Emperor's approval, subtle yet decisive, meant the world had begun to notice Lyra, not as a child to be ignored, but as a person of value, intelligence, and heart. Lyra's eyes shimmered as she looked at Ethan. "You didn't give up on me," she whispered. He smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I never could. I promised to see you, and I meant it always." For the first time, Lyra truly felt the power of being seen and respected, and for the first time, the whispers of the palace seemed less frightening. With Ethan by her side, she realized she could face the world with courage. The small alien princess had survived the danger, earned her voice, and found someone who would never let her be invisible again. And the human who reached for her hand had proven that even across the stars, empathy, respect, and courage could change a life and perhaps a world. Together, they walked on, hands held tightly, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that they had already overcome the greatest obstacle, being seen for who they truly were. The palace was quieter now, but not completely at peace. Whispers still lingered in the halls, and some nobles' eyes followed Lyra and Ethan wherever they went. Yet those whispers could not reach the moments they shared in private, the moments that truly mattered. Lyra had begun to explore parts of the palace she had never dared to enter alone. With Ethan by her side, she wandered through the hidden gardens, the crystal-lit libraries, and even the observation decks that overlooked the floating city. Each step she took felt different now. Each glance from the servants or nobles no longer carried the sting of dismissal. She walked taller, breathed freer, and spoke with a confidence she had never known. One evening, beneath the soft light of the twin moons, Ethan and Lyra sat on a floating balcony. The stars reflected in her eyes, and the violet clouds seemed to sway gently in the night breeze. She leaned her head on his shoulder, small fingers entwined with his. For the first time, she felt that she belonged somewhere, not just as a princess, but as herself. "You've changed everything for me," Lyra whispered. "I never thought someone could care like this." "Someone could see me," Ethan smiled softly. "I always saw you, Lyra, even when no one else did." "That hasn't changed." Her lips curved into a shy, small smile. She realized that strength wasn't just about power or position. Strength was about courage, about trust, about being willing to let someone in. She felt stronger now, not because the palace had changed, but because she had someone to walk beside her. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra's confidence grew. She began to speak in council meetings, her voice steady and clear. Nobles who had once ignored her began to listen, and slowly respect replaced their suspicion. She realized that the smallest acts, standing her ground, speaking her mind, holding her head high, could make a difference. Ethan watched her quietly, pride swelling in his chest. He had known she had strength, but seeing her step into her own light, seeing the way others finally acknowledged her, filled him with awe. She was no longer just the small, ignored princess. She was a leader, a thinker, and someone whose words carried weight. Yet it was not the public moments that defined them, but the private ones. When the palace was asleep and the halls were silent, they would talk about dreams, fears, and distant stars. Lyra showed him paintings she had made of places she imagined visiting, maps of constellations she had named herself, and stories of adventures she longed to take. Ethan listened, encouraged, and sometimes challenged her ideas in the gentlest way, helping her see the full potential she had always held. One night, as the moons cast silver light across the balcony, Lyra looked at him, her voice soft and trembling with emotion. "I never believed I could be brave. Not like this. But with you, I feel like I can face anything." Ethan held her hands, their small fingers entwined with his. "You are brave, Lyra. You've always been brave. I just helped you see it, and I will always be here to remind you when the world tries to make you doubt yourself." A quiet laughter escaped her lips, mingling with the soft wind. For the first time, the fear of being ignored or dismissed seemed distant. She realized that courage was contagious, and trust could heal even the deepest loneliness. In these quiet, private moments, their bond deepened, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with shared presence, trust, and gentle acts of care, Lyra had found her voice. And Ethan had shown her that seeing someone, truly seeing them, could be more powerful than any throne, army, or law. As the moons rose higher and the stars shimmered above, they sat together in silence, hands held, hearts connected. The small alien princess was no longer invisible, and the human who reached for her hand had proven that compassion and courage could bridge worlds and change lives forever. The years had passed, yet the bond between Lyra and Ethan had only grown stronger. The palace no longer whispered with suspicion when they walked together. Instead, many watched in quiet admiration. The small princess, once invisible and overlooked, had become a symbol of courage, wisdom, and change. And by her side, the human who had first reached for her hand had never left. Lyra now walked through the halls with her head held high, confident in herself and her role in the Sci-FI empire. She spoke in council meetings with clarity and authority, her words respected and valued. Nobles who had once doubted her intelligence now listened carefully, and young Sci-FIans looked up to her as an example of bravery and compassion. But even in her public triumphs, it was the quiet moments with Ethan that mattered most. They often returned to the floating gardens, where the light of twin moons painted the petals in silver and violet. Lyra would lean on his shoulder, her small hand entwined with his, and they would watch the stars reflect on the pools below. In those moments, titles and power melted away. She was no longer a princess weighed down by expectation. She was Lyra, seen, loved, and free. One evening, as the air shimmered with the soft glow of the moons, Lyra turned to Ethan. "Do you remember the first time you held my hand?" she asked softly, her eyes glimmering with warmth. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of her pale blue hair from her face. "How could I forget? You were so small, so quiet, yet your presence struck me more than anything in the palace." Lyra laughed lightly, a sound like wind through crystal leaves. "I felt invisible then. No one noticed me. And yet you reached out. You saw me when no one else would." Ethan's gaze softened. "I always will. I promised that the first day, and I mean it. I will always see you, Lyra. Always." Her heart swelled with emotion. The universe had been vast and indifferent, full of power and politics that ignored the small and quiet. Yet here she was, no longer invisible, and beside her stood someone who had crossed worlds to show that humanity's greatest strength was not weapons or fleets, but empathy, courage, and love. Lyra realized then that she had grown in more ways than one. Courage had blossomed within her not because of the palace or the throne, but because someone had chosen to believe in her. She had learned that true power lay in being seen, being understood, and being supported by those who truly cared. Ethan took both her hands in his, holding them gently yet firmly. "The universe might be vast," he said softly, "but no matter how far it reaches, I'll always be here. And you, your courage, your heart, it will shine brighter than any star." Tears filled Lyra's eyes, not from fear or loneliness, but from overwhelming gratitude and love. For the first time in her life, she felt completely safe, completely valued, and completely herself. She pressed her forehead to his, a simple gesture, yet one that spoke of trust, unity, and endless devotion. The palace behind them seemed smaller now, the halls quieter, the whispers faded into history. The small alien princess who had once been ignored had become a beacon, not just for her people, but for anyone who had ever felt unseen. And humanity, through one simple act of kindness, had reminded the universe that compassion and courage could cross stars, conquer fear, and create love where none existed. As the twin moons rose higher, casting a silver glow over Sci-FI, Ethan and Lyra stood together, hands clasped, hearts united. No longer small, no longer invisible. Together they had rewritten their destinies. And in that quiet, perfect moment, the universe seemed to pause. It had witnessed a human and a princess, from entirely different worlds, proving that love, courage, and the simple act of reaching for another hand could change everything. The small alien princess smiled at the human who had first seen her. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan smiled back, his eyes full of warmth. "No, thank you, for letting me see you." And with that, they stepped forward together, ready to face the stars, the future, and whatever the universe had in store, because some bonds once formed could never be broken.